What's going on, everybody? Mortem here, this time bringing you my review of Pathfinder Kingmaker after 100%. So if you are new to my channel, something I like to do is review games after I 100% them. There is a link to my Steam page on my channel that you can look into if you want to see some proof of that, I suppose. But moreover, I do this to kind of set myself apart from other reviewers on YouTube and things like that. And in addition to that, I love CRPGs, so I just kind of in my spare time make my way through them and put up reviews and story series about CRPGs. So if you're interested, that's kind of what my channel is about. I love the Divinity series. I have a ton of stuff on that, as well as like lore videos and things like that. So jumping into it, what is Pathfinder Kingmaker? Pathfinder Kingmaker is a CRPG set in the Pathfinder universe, where the objective is to, of course, play through the story as well as manage a kingdom as a side activity. That's like the big hook of the game, is the kingdom management. Kingmaker can be real-time with pause or turn-based. You can toggle that on or off. Something I like to do at the start of these videos is just kind of cover the story just to get it out of the way. That said, I am planning on doing a story series for this game in like the next week or two. So because of that, I'm just going to kind of skim through it as opposed to the more detailed version I usually give. But regardless, spoilers, obviously. If you were looking for a review, there's probably going to be some regardless, but story spoilers right here. I'll try to remember to put a timestamp down below that you can skip ahead on. But with that in mind, our story for Kingmaker begins at a party thrown by one Jamandi Aldori. She is a member of the Sword Lords, the Aldori Sword Lord. They are a member of the country of Brevoy, which is divided into Rostland and Izia, who are at each other's throats. The Sword Lords and their counterpart, House Sertova, are kind of like the ruling parties of those two individual countries, it would seem. And ever since their leader who had united them disappeared, they've been at each other's throats. So Jamandi has invited all these people to this party because she is looking for adventurers to send to the Stolen Lands where they can establish baronies. This is a legal loophole that allows Jamandi to gain allies in what she suspects to be an upcoming confrontation with House Sertova of Isia. That's kind of the setup, but what we are actually doing is we make our character, and we are one of the people that Jamandi is sending out to the Stolen Lands to claim a barony. Our job here is to go to the Stolen Lands, particularly an area called the Shrike, and take care of a bandit leader in the area known as the Stag Lord. The Stag Lord is a bandit leader, just to be clear. The guy's a bandit. He's not an actual ruler. But while you're doing this, you will be helped by a nymph, because the Stolen Lands are a particularly wild area of Galarion, which is like the world of Pathfinder. So this nymph kind of gives you hints and stuff as where to go to defeat the Stag Lord, and then once you finally defeat the Stag Lord, you report back to Jamandi and you get to establish your own barony. From here, shortly after this, that nymph actually betrays you and tries to have you killed. And as you progress through the game, you'll find out that as problems start arising in your kingdom, that nymph has actually been cursed by one of the eldest. The eldest are sort of like demigods that reside in a place called the First World, which is like a rough draft that the gods worked on before they made the actual world. The eldest are the strongest of their creations of the First World. This nymph did something to piss one of them off, and it cursed her. She is required to destroy 1,000 nations to make this up to the eldest that she upset, and then the curse will be removed. This nymph goes around helping people establish nations and then destroy them, so it counts towards her 1,000 nation total. We learn this for the first couple chapters of the game, and then she starts sending us problems. We handle those problems. Ultimately, it comes to a head where you have to either, find a way to get rid of this nymph permanently, remove her from her curse, destroy the eldest that caused the curse. There's multiple endings, all sorts of stuff like that, and that's just a brief run through the story because, again, I'm doing a full story series on it before too long. This is roughly where the people who hit the spoiler skip should be rejoining us, so let's talk about the rest of the game. When we start up a new game, we will actually be given a choice to play through one of the two DLCs or the actual main campaign, so let me explain this. The DLC Varnhold's Lot actually takes place roughly at the same time as the start of the actual game, and it involves a neighboring barony that was established because Jamandi didn't just send you and your party. The neighboring country was, of course, actually called Varnhold, and you play Magar Varn, the guy who actually establishes that barony, and you kind of go through the events that lead up to Chapter 4 in the main campaign. This is cool because you can import the save and consequences from that into your main campaign and kind of see that interact and play out with each other. The other DLC is called Beneath the Stolen Lands. There are 2 modes to it. There's actually the roguelike mode, which if you're picking it at the start of the game is what you would actually be playing. It's just a dungeon crawler. It's a neat little DLC. I thought it was cool. It's self-contained for the most part. And then there is a separate version of Beneath the Stolen Lands that is part of the main campaign, where it's just a dungeon that unlocks as you progress through the main story, and you get some extra rewards and cool stuff for the main story as well. Overall, pretty solid DLC. Once you choose one of those 3 to start with, you can kind of adjust the difficulty settings. To Kingmaker's credit, there's a lot you can do with this difficulty stuff. It has the presets, of course. You're super easy, you're normal, you're hard, and then there's what they call unfair difficulty. You can choose Last Aslanti mode, I believe I'm saying that right, which is essentially just like an Iron Man version of the game. If your party gets killed, you are permanently dead. It's not as strict as most of these types that I've actually played. It offers you multiple save slots, auto saves. However, once that party dies, it tends to wipe out all of those saves. But it's a little lenient in that as long as you haven't been killed, it gives you multiple save slots to choose from, to reload from. Until, of course, your party's wiped out and then it deletes all of them. But tons of options to adjust with the difficulty of this game. But I want to say there's also a kingdom management part of the difficulty that I'm going to get in later. I'm going to handle that separately. That brings us to character creation. I enjoy the character creation, but unfortunately it suffers from the same problems that most CRPGs suffer from, in that if you don't have a ton of pre-knowledge of the Pathfinder system, you're probably going to have a bad time here, at least the first go-around. Now, truth be told, I personally am more of a D&D guy. Some things that are specific to Pathfinder I wasn't too aware of. Now, for the most part, I play a ton of these games, I figured it out. My point being, and I've actually made a video about this, most CRPGs fail this, in that they seem to have expected you to have done 20 to 30 hours of reading before picking up and playing this game. And that's fine, I get it. This is the type of game that has its audience with the tabletop RPG that it's associated with. But if you want to bring in new players and actually keep this genre alive, I think this is something that long-term needs to be addressed. Other than that, character creation I actually enjoy. There's a ton of options, ways upon ways to build characters. Each class has several subclasses. You can multi-class to a degree. There are no mythic paths, which is a thing in Pathfinder, but you can like multi-class. So each level, you'll get a point, so to speak, to put into a class from all of these options. And I think that's a fun way to kind of multi-class, which is actually something you can do in Dungeons & Dragons anyway. But again, it's just kind of a cool thing you can do here. And then the last 2 things I want to mention is that it doesn't really tell you this right here, but if you are picking a primary spellcasting class like a wizard or a priest or something, you do actually have to manually prepare the spells you are learning. So if you're playing a priest or a cleric or whatever, and you have spells that your character is getting through their divine casting ability, that's great. But you have to go into their character menu, to their spell book, and manually assign those spells to their spell slots. Which makes sense, it just took me an embarrassing amount of time to figure it out, which is why I'm explaining it. And that brings us to the last thing about character creation I want to mention, and that is alignment. Alignment, normally, is just a fun way to roleplay, but Kingmaker takes that to the next level. Alignment is important. Specifically, lawful or evil, or chaotic or good or neutral, or true neutral, I should say. Being like neutral good or neutral evil doesn't really make much of a difference. This is important because those are essentially in-game tags. There will be choices in the game that require you to be of a certain alignment. That is to say, they require you to be lawful, they require you to be evil, they require you to be good. It's usually not like requiring you to be lawful neutral, it's usually like just one of those tags. This is important because any decision with those tags has major consequences. A lot of the choices in the game do still have consequences outside of that, like, whether or not you pass checks or not, but any and every choice affected by one of those tags has huge consequences and usually changes the way either a quest or a situation changes out drastically and almost always affects an in-game slide. So that brings us to the world of the Stolen Lands. I want to talk about adventuring, the kingdom management section, and kind of the world building all a bit separately here. So when it comes to world building, They did a really good job. Pathfinder is a deep, deep game in terms of lore. They've got a lot going on. They really dug into the kingdom side of it. There's a lot of political intrigue going on in the background of this game, which makes sense if your game's called Kingmaker. I mean, fair enough, you know? But a lot of the way things are in Kingmaker, like, you know, this political intrigue and then the way like lands and classes and stuff are divided up, if you have a lot of that knowledge, it's going to pay off and you're going to get to see that in game, which I thought was really cool. They did a really good job with the world building. The other part of world building is adventuring in that world. So when it comes to adventuring, there's a few things I want to talk about. That is the combat, obviously, and the unseen checks that the game is rolling for you, like perception. So in this game, say you walk up to where a secret wall should be. It's going to roll an invisible check on whether or not you notice that, you know, wall that goes into another path or whatever. That's fine. The problem is that it's never just extra stuff behind those walls. It's never exclusively extra things, I should say. There are moments where seeing that wall is going to lead to better outcomes to quests and things, which is normally fine even then, you know, because like, you know, did you discover the secret path around the back and then surprise an enemy or something? Fine, okay, sure. I can deal with that. The problem is that Kingmaker has endings that exclusively rely on you noticing a ton of stuff, so to speak. And because of that, sometimes these unseen checks can opt you out of things that you can literally never knew were even an option, which, you know, as someone who 100%ed the game, required me to go back and find. So personally, I didn't like that there was no real notice that I was even rolling a check on some of this stuff. And that can be a little frustrating when you're going for the 100%. I would say most people that's not going to probably bother you or you would even notice. But you take a game like Baldur's Gate 3 where you walk into an area and it rolls that check and you will see that visual dice roll above your character's head where it's showing you that it's rolling for something. It doesn't tell you what, obviously, but you know you just rolled and either passed or failed for something, so that's interesting. I prefer that method personally. But when it comes to combat, like I said, it's real-time or turn-based. You can turn either or on or off, so I always prefer games that have either or option. The problem with that, though, is that it tends to be designed for one or the other. This is a game that was designed for real-time with pause. And I usually try to play the mode that it was obviously designed for. And while I'm glad the other option is an option, it tends to be underwhelming, which is kind of how I feel about the turn-based in this game. Now, when it comes to difficulty of the combat, none of the difficulty in this game revolves around skill. And I don't necessarily mean that in a mean way, because that's kind of the nature of tabletop games, which this is based on. It's just that combat in this game all ultimately boils down to knowing what you're fighting, luck of the dice rolls, and understanding the mechanics of what your enemies are doing. So on unfair difficulty, monsters do like 200% increased damage and stuff, which is fine. But again, ultimately that just comes down to luck of your dice rolls. Like, you know, are you getting a crit at an opportune time, or are you getting crit at an inopportune time? Stuff like that. Now the downside of this is that it makes the higher difficulties less difficult per se as like a skill thing, and more that like you just have to go look up what you're fighting so you can use the appropriate spells and defenses to get past it. I would say for every combat encounter on the unfair difficulty playthrough, I basically just spent a lot of time researching those enemies and what they were weak to and what I could do to counter whatever they were doing. So it's less that it's difficult, it's just that like you gotta go look it up. If anything, I would say the unfair difficulty is unfair to your time, and that's about it. And that brings me to kingdom management. Here's the thing. I hate the kingdom management in this game. It's really bad. So I have a bit of a love-hate relationship with this game, and that is because you want to like this game. You do. It's cool. You're enjoying yourself. If you're into CRPGs, you'll be like, yeah, like this is cool. I want to enjoy this. And then the kingdom management is like, I'd actually prefer that you didn't. So, Jesus. So the kingdom management will just fight you every step of the way. This is why I talked about the kingdom management difficulty earlier, and then I would talk about it here. This wasn't a feature at release, but these days you can just turn the kingdom management to automatic. And that is that the game will handle it for you. You can't even access it. The only thing you can do is skip time to the next events. But that brings me to my next point. Even if you turn the kingdom management to auto, everything, and I mean everything, is timed in this game. Every single quest has a timer. For the most part, it's generous, but if you don't know that, you can fail even the main quest if you don't go fast enough, which again, I'm inherently okay with. It's just that they are throwing the main quest at you. They are throwing the kingdom management at you. They are throwing companion quests at you. There's like a dozen companions that all have their own quests that they are constantly bombarding you with. If you want to explore the Stolen Lands because it's your first time in game, guess what? You can't because you are fighting a timer and it will punish you. Because of that, there is an optimal way to play through this game where you will hit everything at the appropriate time as well as get the achievements you need, so to speak, if you're going for that. There is an optimal way through this game, and it drives me crazy because they won't just let you play the game. So because of that, auto mode helps. It does help. I will say it is dramatically less stressful if you turn automatic on, and I highly recommend you do so. That said, turning automatic mode on actually turns off the associated kingdom management achievements. In order to 100% the game, I had to engage with this kingdom management system a lot. And that's why I have such a strong opinion about it. It's awful. They did not implement this well. I could see it maybe doing okay in the tabletop version of this adventure path that Pathfinder has made, simply because at a table, the DM can adjust the rules as necessary to keep it fun. A video game is less capable of doing that, and I truly think this game suffers because of it. So with kingdom management, it's pretty all-encompassing. You will be taking territories, you will be building towns, cities, upgrading things, getting artisans through all your territories, like upgraded so they can bring you stuff. And even on just basic normal difficulty, you are going to be bombarded with tasks constantly. Again, it gets even worse because there's these kingdom events you'll have to deal with, which are like problems and opportunities, basically. Problems need to be addressed because they can throw your kingdom into chaos. Every kingdom difficulty above effortless, which is just above auto, will cause your kingdom and your game to end if it falls below a certain level of unrest. Unrest being like a level system for your kingdom that gives you appropriate bonuses and stuff depending on how well your kingdom is doing. So in addition to this, you can appoint advisors to handle these events for you. You get 5 at a base, and then when you upgrade the associated 5 stats with those advisors, you can get up to 5 more advisors as like a sub-advisor to the main one. And then from there, you can have at a max 10 advisors handling these events for you. But here's the thing. Some of those really only get like 1 or 2 people available for the role. And depending on your choices in game, those characters can die. It is possible to screw yourself here if you are not playing on a difficulty where it is impossible to lose because of it. I don't want to spoil too much, but suffice to say, it is, again, possible to permanently lock yourself into a situation where you no longer have any available advisors for a role, and now, unless you turn the difficulty of the kingdom management all the way to effortless, where it won't actually cost you a game over, you've essentially screwed yourself out of, again, just the advisor, but more importantly, also certain achievements if you were going for them, but like didn't exactly know what to do yet. I genuinely did not enjoy this kingdom management system in basically any regard. I ultimately had to master it to get some of these achievements, and that just made it worse. Like, I hated this kingdom management part. Most of my deep problems with this game somehow stem from kingdom management. I hate it. Last thing I want to talk about before we kind of wrap up is companions. So, companions. There's a lot of them. You don't have to take any of them with you. You can ignore all of them. You can choose to engage with all of them. But in all seriousness, I think there's like 10, I believe it actually was. There's a lot. Some of them are DLC locked, which is why I don't remember the exact number. Like I said, everything is timed. That includes their companion quests. If you don't do them in the appropriate amount of time or before certain events happen, those quests will fail. So because of that, once I got the achievement for doing all of the quests in a single playthrough, I basically only focused on the companions I actually wanted to adventure with, because it's very difficult to do all of them because of this everything is timed mantra that the game seems to enjoy so much. All of the companions are pretty good. I actually enjoyed the storyline for most of them. Some of the DLC ones are like a little on the light side. You can tell they were just trying to like get it in there. Whereas most of the companions are heavily involved in the story pretty much all the way through. All of them react to things. All of them have things to say. All of them have their own things going on. All of them that can be advisors will approach that role in their own way. The companions overall are very good. I would talk about them individually, but honestly, there's just too many to do that without spending like 30 minutes on it. So with that, I'm going to wrap up what I didn't like about the game and we will call it a review. So, things I genuinely did not enjoy. As I mentioned, kingdom management is at the top of that list. It's awful. I hate it. I wish it wasn't here. I get that it's part of the adventure path for Pathfinder, so here we are. God, I hated it so much. Other things I don't like is that everything is timed. I get it. It's, again, part of the adventure path, but it stresses you out, especially on your first playthrough, especially if you're trying to juggle the kingdom management. Everything being timed is a real pain. Without knowing, beforehand what the optimal route through the game is, you're gonna have a bad time, I would bet. And if I had to guess, is probably why only 7% of the people who have played this game have actually beaten it. That is a real Steam statistic. Feel free to go look it up. That is incredibly low. Most games, it runs 20 to 30% because most people don't finish games nonetheless, but 7 is probably one of the lowest I've ever seen. And lastly, one of the other things I don't like, and this is again a problem with CRPGs, is simply that all of the pre-required knowledge to play this game. I would probably estimate 20 to 30 hours just researching fights and stuff because I didn't know enough about the Pathfinder system to figure it out myself. And that's just a bad time, and I hope CRPGs in general will find some way of dealing with that. I'm aware there's an in-game bestiary I probably could have used, but sometimes, it's easier to just read an internet article. But my point is, games like this have always suffered from a knowledge gap, and Pathfinder Kingmaker is just another one on the list in that regard. Overall, though, is it worth the money? If you see it on sale, yeah, absolutely buy it. I would caution you going into it to just turn the kingdom management to auto if you don't care about the achievements and just enjoy the story for what it is. Other than how much I disliked kingdom management, it was a good game. I had fun playing it besides that. So there you go, guys. There is my review of Pathfinder Kingmaker after 100%. I hope you enjoyed it. I should have a story series going up in the next week or two. Thank you so much for watching. May you wander in wisdom and have an amazing day.